Hello and welcome. Today I'm joined by Jamie Edwards. Jamie is the ex-co-founder of Kaiko, which he exited to private equity in 2018. He then joined Deliveroo as a product manager early on and worked across a variety of different business units before finding his way into the talent domain, where he has spent more than 6 years and is now the VP of Talent and Organizational Development. Welcome, Jamie.
Thank you for having me.
Awesome. Well, thank you for joining. So, Jamie, would love to kind of understand a bit about your background. You've got quite a different background to most folks that, run talent organizations at large established companies like Deliveroo. Would love to hear it a bit in your own words, your journey into our world of talent.
Yeah, sure. My journey into talent. I mean, when you hear it spoken out loud, it sounds bloody mental. But going all the way back, self-taught web developer, a UX designer. Wouldn't have called it UX design back then, but that's what I did. Studied computer science at university, and then halfway through that met someone who would be my co-founder for Kako. He had the idea to build a customer service software platform and got started a bit before I joined, but very kindly to invite me to join part of his founding team. And for the best part of the decade, we built that startup. We grew it up to, I think, sort of peak headcount was maybe about 250, 280 people around the world. And in the early days, I was fixing bugs, pushing pull requests, answering support tickets, writing blog posts, updating our website, doing everything. Certainly half the to-do list my co-founder, who was the CEO, didn't. The sort of latter part of that journey, as we really started to scale and build out the leadership team, I focused on go-to-market. So sales, product marketing, and product strategy, and always people. So I built our people team that looked after, the usual portfolio of people stuff. So we exited that in 2018 to private equity and had a bit of an existential crisis around what am I going to do in my life? How do you articulate that grab bag of things working on a startup, not having sort of a real boss? Or sort of proper job, so to speak, or at least one my mum would understand. And I was very fortunate that I got introduced to Deliveroo's chief product officer, a guy called Akshay, who's no longer at Deliveroo. And he hired me into his team, into the project management team, to do, I don't think he knew what, because I turned up on day one and he said, Jamie, go find the most broken thing to fix. So for the first 6 months, I think I can best describe the type of stuff I was doing as product operations. We definitely didn't call it product operations back then, but I was looking at things like, as a hyperscaling company, growing its headcount a lot, building more and more stuff. We're creating all of these different product groups. How do we help them better coordinate together? How do we better roadmap? How do we better size opportunities? And I also started working on a bunch of talent related things in the product management org and the tech org. So getting into things like, okay, if we want to triple the size of the thing in the next 18 months, what does that actually look like once people start and show up? How are we going to train and onboard them without crushing existing capacity? And things like, what does it mean to be a product manager versus a senior product manager? What does progression look like? What do expectations look like? And I think it's through that I started working with our people team. And then in a very Deliveroo way, that part-time job became a full-time job. And that was just over 6 years ago.
There you go. That's a really interesting journey. I guess taking a step back and taking your talent hat off, what was kind of your outside in view on talent and people functions before you kind of worked in one directly? Did you have a perception, or was there kind of like a thought you had about them? And how has that changed since you've kind of led them yourselves?
So I'm embarrassed. Yeah. So how did my perception, what perception did I have of sort of TA teams and professional TA coming into it? So I'd learned how to hire the hard way as a startup founder, and that was by getting it really wrong more often than not, until we sort of started to figure out how to get it more right. And some of the light bulb moments we had on the journey and getting lots and lots of hiring wrong for our startup was by not treating the process of recruiting and talent acquisition and hiring as systematically as we were customer acquisition or, product development and product management. So it was when we had that light bulb moment and we started getting some expert advice and professional support in, and as we were scaling, we're hiring our own recruitment team. Once we started taking that lens on the process and treating it as systematically and rigorously as we would do any other business process, that's when we started to get A, the hang of it, but also B, realizing actually I can understand now why this is a fully professionalized industry and people spend lifelong careers building this craft. So that was a very useful lesson then coming into Deliveroo and then starting to work with the TA team, where I was really cognizant that I had never been a professional recruiter. And that is very different in all respects, even down to hiring as a founder is very different to recruiting for someone else or for someone else's team. So I was really cognizant of that coming in. And I really tried to just play the role of professional dumbass, asking the stupid questions, the basic questions, and just like really trying to learn what the sort of as is was at the time. And then the things I tended to lean into early on were anything that I could support around the scaffolding and scaling of our operations, especially sort of technology enablement, especially as far as our sort of project and program management is concerned, how we started balancing really big, tall orders of near-term delivery for a hyperscaling company with the stuff we need to be building for the future, which was, entirely what I did, building Kayako and scaling our kind of go-to-market machines and motions. I think that has been successful. Defer to my team on that. But we, when I joined the TA team at Deliveroo, we were about 1,000 people globally. Today, we're just over 4,500. We've been through lots of ups and downs, COVID, IPO, lots of different phases and types of hiring and team building we've had to do. So we've seen a lot. I'm definitely going to say it was a smooth journey. One thing I definitely will say is we're still learning. I'm still learning. But it's been a great one.
Yeah, that's awesome. What would you say the thing that you changed your mind on the most from a talent perspective since you started at Deliveroo in that kind of talent role? Like, what's the thing that's kind of changed as time's gone on, as the company's grown, and you've kind of changed your view on?
I think there's a couple of things. The first one is I would often hear the team, and not just at Deliveroo, but other peers I've got who work in TA in other companies, complain about the difficulty of business partnership with stakeholders and the business not getting TA and recruiting. I was aware of sort of some of the obstacles there, but I was a little bit dismissive of like how hard it would actually be to change mindsets and to build sort of shared empathy for the kind of effort and pain and the work that goes into recruiting and hiring and doing it really well and doing it at scale. And seeing that firsthand and sort of being there with the team, going on that journey and coming up against all these different perspectives and viewpoints from different managers really brought that to life for me. And was actually one of then the biggest focuses I had in terms of where I was leaning into in terms of how do we enable our team to make progress, have more influence, establish credibility in the business, which I think is like an enduring, always on pursuit. And then I think the second thing was, and this is a more recent thing for Deliveroo, realizing that what makes a successful hire here, especially a company that's at scale, changing as much as it is in a really competitive landscape that we're often having to respond to. In almost all cases, being a good fit for Deliveroo trumps being a really good fit for the role. And by that, I mean like a strong functional fit and the technical skills and so on. And the vast majority of cases, when we look at our most successful hires and our least successful hires, that has been the differentiating factor. And that's something
Can we dig into that a little bit, Jamie?
Yeah,
so
go ahead.
that is something that over the course of this podcast series, we've heard time and time again, and it's really interesting. It's something that you're seeing as well. But in your case at Deliveroo, when you say a good fit for Deliveroo, can you distill that a little bit? Like, what are the hallmarks of someone that's a great fit at Deliveroo?
Someone who's a great fit at Deliveroo. So we, what makes a hire really successful at Deliveroo? We boil it down into values alignment and then unpacking that. So we've got a number of company values and a number of kind of behavioral indicators that ladder up to those. So the types of things we want to be seeing for us to say, yes, there's values alignment here. And we spend a lot of time really trying to boil down, okay, we can't assess everyone for everything all the time, nor is that appropriate, because what parts of our values someone needs to be spiking on to be successful, a particular part of the business or context will vary. And it also varies based on, seniority and where you're on your career. But we've spent a lot of time thinking about what are the like universal must-have behaviors and mindsets that predict success and that kind of good for Deliveroo bit here. I think the first one is curiosity. So I don't just mean asking the right questions or wanting to figure out how something works, but a real like passion and innate desire and drive to understand things deeper than anyone else has or could. And that is really important here, particularly for our managers. We don't just want our managers to manage stuff and become conduits. We want them to really understand the work of their team and what they're doing. And we think that predicts really strong leadership here. I think the second one is intellectual honesty. Well, parts to that. One, being comfortable trafficking in the truth into the conversation, even if it's uncomfortable to say or for someone else to hear. So this could be something that challenges your own perspective. It could be something that might contradict the very purpose for what your team is kind of building or working towards, but always putting sort of the business first and optimizing for the business beyond kind of yourself or your team. And then that comes with intellectual humility. So really leaving your ego aside, out of the room. We find that fosters the most productive conversations, innovation, challenging sacred cows, kind of like breaking down hierarchies and silos. And then the last thing that I think really predicts success here is not just being comfortable with ambiguity, but really embracing it. So thriving in the unknown, thriving with a challenge along the lines of, this is a thing that we need to achieve. We have no idea how to get there. Go do it. Which has been all what Deliveroo has been about. I mean, we pioneered so much in the delivery space. Certainly the first player in Europe invented, I think, at least in Europe or in the West, dark kitchens. That innovation piece has been just so key to our journey and continues to be the case.
Earlier on, you spoke about aligning talent teams with the business teams and building that empathy, building those sort of stakeholder relationships. How do you go about that at Deliveroo? How is it that you align those teams together?
So I think it's about building empathy, and that goes two ways. And I've always encouraged our team to start with what we control, and that is how we can understand our stakeholders as well as we possibly can. What are they facing in their day-to-day? What are their objectives? What are they working towards? What is the best kind of hiring experience for them? What would delightful and great sort of look like? And then armed with that information, flexing our approach to engaging with those stakeholders. That would be sort of part A. And then part B, how do we encourage and create empathy going the other way? How do we create like a shared appreciation for what's on our agenda, what our team is doing? And then again, I've encouraged our team to take a flexible and creative approach to that. It can be hard to get the time to focus on recruiting specific things with certain stakeholders, especially if their hiring kind of looks like this through the year and isn't always a sort of priority, so to speak. So I've pushed our team to think about, well, what other things can we be hooking into? Are we able to get a place in their team meetings once a week, once a month? Do they conduct monthly business reviews or sort of people reviews that we could hook into? When someone has made a hire and they've been really successful, it's after 90 days, rather than just sending like a hire quality survey out, can we sit down with that manager and really unpick, so how has that gone? Is this person brilliant? Why is that? If a hire hasn't worked out, doing the same sort of thing, and then tying it back to kind of the work of the TA team and using those opportunities to bring to life the effort, the pain, the sourcing, the dropouts, the whole lot. Similarly with candidate experience data quantified through surveys, as well as the anecdotes, finding opportunities to bring that to life for the business, and put real kind of like customer stories. I mean, candidates are customers at the end of the day, and bringing those into the room and those conversations with your stakeholders. And I don't think there's ever kind of like a silver bullet process or moment. It's just, it is a constant drumbeat of all of this stuff that, in my experience, certainly at Deliveroo, that has created really great two-way empathy and positive stakeholder relationships, and has set our team up in a better position to be able to influence where they've needed to.
That's super interesting. It's I think where you see teams where they have like a throw it over the wall mentality, that's kind of like where these breakdowns happen the most. And I've seen it in a lot of organizations where hiring becomes actually the responsibility of the TA team. And hiring managers sort of knock on the door and go, well, where are my candidates? And it's always one of the things I try and break down when I'm working with companies. It's like, no, you as the hiring manager, you're responsible for that hire getting made. Ultimately, it's your team. And the talent team is there to kind of be a supportive function to that, but ultimately you make the decision. And I think, like, for me, breaking down those walls between the teams, integrating them as deeply as possible. I remember at Improbable, we went as far as having the talent people sitting within the engineering teams that they were recruiting for, so that they would deeply understand, just by listening to this, whether it's the stand-up or listening to the retros, understanding the challenges they face, so that they could relay those both to the candidates, but also talk much more interestingly about the jobs they're representing, and also making sure that hiring managers had goals, or within their OKRs or whatever their objective framework was, that they had very clear deliverables around recruiting. Because
I love that.
ultimately, if your job is to deliver X software and that's 100% of your time, and then someone slaps on 20% recruitment time on top of that, that's going to get pushed to the side. And if you're not measured on it, you're not going to do it.
Yeah,
And so
totally.
I
I
think like
completely
making
agree.
sure that managers have that as an objective they carry was always one way of kind of realigning that expectation, shall I say.
Yeah, I agree. I think you've touched on something that reminded me that was effective here. A couple of expectation setting bits that we as a TA team have led. One has been incorporating everyone contributes to hiring here into we call it our levels and expectations framework at Deliveroo. So it's what is expected of every single person, every single role at kind of various levels, and kind of how does that scale with seniority. And we have contributing to hiring in practically every single one of those, starting with being a great ambassador, amplifying some of our like talent marketing, representing Deliveroo well externally, through to interviewing, through to then team building, through to then role modeling best hiring practices. That's been really helpful because then it plugs into performance reviews. It plugs into kind of like your 360 feedback and what that's anchored to. And then the second thing is we've, in our latest iteration of this launched last year, we have a 2 to 3 hour hiring manager training that every new manager goes through. And we put all existing managers through actually to kind of like rebaseline, where the first 15 minutes of that is expectations. And we flash up a grid of what basic, good, and great hiring manager behaviors look like across candidate attraction and generation and process adherence and so on. And we break out and we kind of self-reflect on how we think we show up against these things. And that is just so illuminating for people. And they realize, actually, I do none of this. Candidate generation, I thought that was the TA team's problem and job to do. But you're so right. It's about that kind of embedding, getting the expectations really clear. And I think what's worked for us at Deliveroo is just finding all of those touch points and artifacts that already exist, whether it's around expectations or performance or onboarding, that we can hook into to really reinforce those.
Yeah, makes sense. What do you enjoy the most around talent and sort of people and this kind of part of the organization? Like, what is it that's kind of kept you engaged for all these years and into the future?
So what's kept me engaged and excited about talent? The first thing is just so messy. People are messy and complicated. But then at the same time, we've got a job of scaling processes. And to do that, you need to standardize as much as possible and get things right more often than not. And that is just so hard. And I don't think it's been cracked, whether it's from like a psychology or like org psychology kind of perspective, whether it's from a process perspective. And to the extent you make progress, something fundamental changes, whether it's about the jobs market or the talent landscape or whatever our priority skills are, or new technology paradigms. I mean, very topical with AI coming in, potentially changing all of that and requiring a rewriting. So I think it's this. I think I measure my kind of job satisfaction by like my rate of learning. And if I go too long without learning something new or needing to solve something new and go too long with kind of running the machine, then that's kind of a litmus test for do I need to make a new step or take a new step? And I've never had that moment at Deliveroo. I think that's part Deliveroo context. And I have not had that moment in 6.5 years working fully and being fully immersed in talent. And I think that's going to continue to be the case, especially with the amount of change we're staring at and that we're going to have to respond to and play a role in solving.
Just as soon as you get to a point where you think you've understood something fundamentally shifts and you have to do it all again. I've seen it many, many times now. Just when you just think you got your head around something like outbound or what it is, the market shifts and it changes 180.
Yeah.
What's the biggest opportunity, obstacle, however you want to frame it for Deliveroo and talent right now? Like, what's the problem that you're thinking about the most?
So the problems I'm thinking about the most are keeping me up at night at Deliveroo. I can give you a short-term one and a long-term one. Short-term, we are maintaining a high hiring bar while we are continuing to scale the company, while as a public company, we're now under sort of a different set of compensation constraints as we were sort of as a private company. That is a near-term challenge for us. We are trying to strike the balance of the right amount of decentralization of hiring decision making to push decision making as far down the org chart as we possibly can, to enable managers to make great decisions for their teams because they're closest to them, they are the experts in that, and moving quickly with the right amount of centralizations around those things that really, really matter to us. So like some of the stuff we talked about at the top in terms of being good for Deliveroo, and those 5, key behaviors and mindsets and attitudes, whatever you want to label them, that we know if someone does not bring to the table on day one, it is really painful for everyone involved. That has been a challenge and continues to be a challenge. And it continues to be a big focus of what we're experimenting with, whether that is some assessment automation or more standardized assessments. We're running some experiments, some AI enabled, some not. And we are also rolling out a company-wide bar raiser type program, codenamed Project Team Teal, aligned with the teal of our brand. Is a Team Teal interview, and that is a group of highly calibrated interviewers who know what good looks like here, and they play a cross-functional role in different interview processes without a ton of skin in the game in terms of making a hire and focusing solely on that good for delivery question. And we've seen some really interesting results off the back of that. The long-term thing that has been keeping me up at night is, what do our recruiting channels look like in 3-5 years time, in a world in which every single recruiter in the world is empowered to 1,000x their outbound productivity through AI and automation, and flood the market with hyper-personalized, hyper-targeted outreach, whether it's over like LinkedIn or email or what have you, such that, like we've seen with sales outbound motions, response rates goes down, engagement rates go down, and it becomes really hard to penetrate and sort of bubble up and cut through. And we rely a lot on headhunting and sort of traditional outbound and outreach sourcing methods, particularly through LinkedIn and email. And that keeps you up at night because we don't have a clear answer to what that new world is going to look like. And we've got some hypotheses. So we touch well over 100,000 candidates in a meaningful way every single year. We probably have in our ATS one we're ever going to need to speak to about a job at Deliveroo for the next N number of years. How do we get more out of that data? And how do we sort of use AI or technology to bubble up the right kind of candidates and moments to re-engage with, to keep warm, to sample and so on? Investing in brand so we can continue to earn one of those top 3 slots in a candidate's mind around where I might go next or who I might be interested in picking up the phone to. And then number 3, talent marketplaces. Will we see a world in which there is a bit of a resurgence of those, where there is a pay-to-play model and there is a proposition to a candidate that we will only let really high quality employers and propositions and opportunities through?
I mean, it's obviously very pertinent to what we're doing here at Dex.
Yeah, indeed.
It's super interesting to me, the outbound question, and it's something that I've spent an awful lot of time thinking about, both in the creation of Dex, but also beyond. And I think that the latest announcement from Apple really should undercut that, outbound is changing, and there's a lot being made about how outbound's dying. I don't think it is a bit like a cockroach; it'll never die. It's going to change form.
Was that Apple announcement the phone screening thing? Yes, yeah.
And so it is fascinating to me that Gmail hasn't done the same thing already years ago, whereby, look, I already don't know. I don't receive many emails, interestingly, into my personal email account, other than things I have signed up for.
Don't take it personally.
No, yeah, no one wants to talk to me. And it's the same. And it's the same with phone calls, right? It's the same with phone calls. If I actually think about how many phone calls I receive, it's pretty limited. And my phone doesn't ring. I don't know anybody who has a ringtone. It's not like the 90s anymore. We had a personalized ringtone. I don't know anyone that's phones rings anymore, right? And it's such a kind of a strange idea that you'd be cold outbounding. And so with Apple making this now, effectively making it very, very difficult to even get through, introducing this AI gatekeeper, I think we'll increasingly see AI gatekeepers both in inboxes, and I think that our sensitivity to it is going to be heightened, and it's going to be negative. And as you say, if the perceived value of a personalized message goes to 0 because the effort required to do it is nothing, and it's probably not real anyway, I think that the way we think about outbound really is much more like, how do you activate inbound? And it's how do you prompt somebody to actually inbound you? How do you put personalized content in front of them? How do you put a personalized proposition in front of them in a way that they have selected to see? And I think you'll see a much bigger increase in the way that brands are marketed. I think influencers will be a key role in this as well. But I think outbound is changing structurally. And I think it's on a bit of a, it's basically a timeline for when Google decides to turn off email. They've already done a lot to limit it. And when that happens, I think we'll see a significant shift.
Yeah, that's fascinating, also terrifying. Going to be so exciting to see what we end up building. Permission-led outbound, yeah, or a world in which it costs you something to contact someone, and the rate of that and the price you have to pay scales with how in demand that person is.
That's interesting. As a founder, I get a lot of inbound from salespeople. And maybe I should put up like a reward page. It's like, if you donate X amount to charity, I'll take the inbound. And so, you have to pay to play. How confident are you on your pitch? That'd be interesting, wouldn't it? Thinking a little bit about the future. Obviously, we've spoken there about some of the problems. I guess, where are you most excited? Like, what's the most exciting application of AI within talent that you see at the moment? I mean, maybe it's kind of something you've already spoken about slightly.
Yeah, most interesting, exciting application of AI in talent. Gosh, there's a lot to think about. I think one of the first ones is, and I think this is probably very relevant to Dex. I think we have an ability to automate much more data collection from candidates about themselves, about their preferences, which may come out in an unstructured way. But then with AI technology, we can then put some structure and legibility and do something much more useful with that data. Whereas before, to get structured data out of a candidate, you would need to ask them to complete like a giant form with lots of tick boxes and things. I think there's now much lower friction, better experience ways of doing that with candidates, whether it's through chatbots or kind of like voice AI technology. And I think that could enable such better candidate experiences in terms of personalization, job matching, filtering, screening. I see a world in which we start to shorten interview processes and the number of hoops we ask candidates to jump through. I think that's one. And then secondly, kind of like more internally facing for TA teams, I think what we're seeing with the latest sort of AI technology and generative AI in particular is the level of abstraction is increasing. Go back 20 years ago, people were sweating the syntax of programming languages. And then as programming languages got more abstracted, they started sweating kind of the building blocks of their software more than specific syntax. And with AI now, you probably don't even need to worry about the programming languages. Your building blocks are now much bigger. And that's going to enable people to build their own technology and software far more than was ever possible. And I think what's going to be really interesting is seeing how that's going to enable and empower smaller, maybe less resourced talent teams to build some really cool stuff that is very specific to their context, their candidates. I think it will enable them to personalize more. I think it will enable them to bespoke process more for the business in a way that works for them. And I think that's really exciting.
That's super interesting. One of the things that I know is that within most HR, recruitment, tech, whatever you want to call it, I find that the need for those systems to be so configurable often leads to essentially unusable software, where everything is like, you've got 57 different options for each button, and I think
Yeah.
you've got this kind of like spectrum between opinionated software that's easy to use, but you have to use it the way it wants to be used. And I think of iOS on one end, and then you've kind of got the other end of the spectrum where it can do basically whatever you want, but it's a headache to use. And I would put something like this is going to be contested here. I would put Notion on that end. Like, I find Notion a complete headache to use.
Yeah.
Because it can do anything. Therefore, can it do, you can do anything with it. Well, then what do you do?
Yes. Or you can make like a bloody mess out of the thing because it's so easy to do that and create
Yes,
something terrible.
exactly. And I think in a world where you can have essentially custom software, does it make sense for businesses of Deliveroo scale, where you probably do have the resource and you could find the budget to do it, to actually run your own software that is custom built for your particular problems, your particular nuances of hiring and different loops? I think we're probably converging on a point where that becomes economically viable. But I wonder if that's actually a direction people will go in, or you think you'll always be I think it reopens the question of build or buy on a lot of these systems, basically.
I think it does. I see a world where the whole SaaS business apps landscape, like as it stands today, the whole thing is going to be disrupted in some shape or form, big because of this. And once that disruption happens, I do still see a world where actually, no, we do still have vendors and they're building business software and they can specialize and focus on that better than any other business either can or would be worth the opportunity cost of them trying to sort of compete with or replace. But I think the subset of sort of use cases where it really does make sense to build your own thing, because the upside of bespoking that in whatever way is it's still worth a lot, but then the cost of kind of maintaining and doing that comes down. I do think we will see a shift there, and I think there's so many opportunities for that in TA, because I think one of the biggest things holding back TA performance and productivity, and also great candidate experiences that work for your candidates, is when either through it's the software you're using or the way your business's processes work today, and you end up building those out to the candidates, they're having to jump through your hoops. And that can really diminish what could otherwise be a competitive advantage in the talent market, if you were able to flip it, which is what does great look like for the candidates, and let's build that back to the business and make that work. And I think more TA teams will be empowered and enabled to do that and kind of like flip it and then build back from the candidate to create an ideal candidate experience, versus what we do today, which is depending on your ATS, depending on your finance processes, your headcount processes, determines a lot of your candidate experience.
Yeah. It's interesting. You actually don't own the experience. You kind of like have to deliver what the vendor decides. Like at any company that's, that uses something like a Workday or whatever, they have got very prescriptive ways that candidates sign up, and candidates largely hate those systems. And so you're immediately introducing friction and pain when actually you probably don't even want to do that. Super interesting. Jamie, we could talk all day, but I want to be really grateful that you've joined us today and shared that with us. We'd love to have you back on in the not too distant future. But thank you very much.
Oh, thank you for having me. Love the conversation, and best of luck with Dex and everything.
Thanks so much. Cheers.